Welcome to another deep dive. Our mission today is to extract some surprising insights about memory,
Okay.
especially ones you can use in your own life, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can we actually use this stuff?
Yeah, I'm ready to dig in. The fact that Smirnov was working in the Soviet Union in the 1960s, that's really crucial context here.
Okay.
Soviet psychology was very influenced by Marxist-Leninist ideology, which put a huge emphasis on the role of activity and social context in shaping our mental processes.
Okay, so not just sitting alone in a room memorizing flashcards.
Exactly. This was a big contrast to some of the psychological theories that were popular in the West at the time, which Smirnov often critiqued for being too focused on, just rote memorization. He was interested in how we remember things in the real world.
Right.
Where our emotions and goals and even our social interactions come into play.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's like the difference between cramming for a test
Yeah.
versus truly, understanding a concept and being able to apply it.
Precisely. And that leads us to one of Smirnov's key ideas. He believed that our cognitive processes, so thinking, learning, remembering, are not just carried out in activity, but they're actually formed by activity.
Wait, so our memories are shaped by what we do,
Yeah.
not just by what we're, trying to memorize.
That's what Smirnov argued. He even went so far as to say, and I'm quoting here, the cognitive processes are not only carried out, but are also formed in human activity. So he believed that engaging in real-world activities, whether it's, working on a project or having a conversation or solving a problem, this is what actually shapes our memory and how it functions.
Okay, that's a pretty radical idea, but I can kind of see what he's getting at.
Yeah.
I remember things better when I've actually done something related to them.
Right.
Not just read about it in a book.
Exactly. And this is where Smirnov's critique of associative psychology comes in.
Okay.
He felt that these older theories were too focused on rote memorization.
Right.
Memorizing lists of words or dates, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
He thought that approach missed the richness and complexity of real-life memory.
He actually said those older studies aim for a maximum simplification of activity on the part of the memorizer and toward a standardization and most strict regulation of the whole process of memorization.
Right.
It sounds like he wasn't pulling any punches.
He definitely felt strongly that this kind of simplified approach to studying memory just didn't capture the full picture.
Okay, so if it's not all about rote memorization, what else is going on? What makes some memories stick while others fade away?
Yeah. Well, Smirnov believed that factors like our emotions, our goals, and even our sense of self play a huge role in shaping what we remember and what we forget.
This is where it gets really interesting, right?
Yeah.
He even uses this great anecdote about Nietzsche.
Yes.
Who apparently forgot something on purpose just to protect his pride.
It's a fantastic example.
Yeah.
He quotes Nietzsche as saying, "I did this, memory said to me, but I could not have done this. Pride told me and was adamant, and memory had to yield to it."
Wow. So our emotions can literally block out memories. That's making me rethink some things.
It's a powerful illustration of how memory isn't just about passively storing information.
Yeah.
It's an active process.
Yeah.
Constantly being influenced by our feelings and our self-perception.
Okay.
But then Smirnov contrasts this with the educator Ushinsky, who believed in training children to remember through effort.
Okay, so which is it? Are we at the mercy of our emotions, or can we train our brains to remember things?
Smirnov believed both were true.
While he acknowledged the power of emotions and self-perception, he also saw memory as a skill that could be developed through practice, like a muscle.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. I was starting to worry that my memory was just this chaotic mess controlled by my moods. But if it's a skill, that means I can work on it, right?
Absolutely. And that's what's so exciting about Smirnov's work. It empowers us to take control of our own memory by understanding the factors that influence it.
So it's not just about trying harder to remember, it's about understanding how our memory actually works.
Exactly. And one of the key things Smirnov emphasizes is the concept of mnemonic orientation.
Mnemonic orientation. That sounds intriguing. What is that? Some kind of superpower?
Think about it this way. Are you trying to remember something for a short time?
Okay.
For a quiz or something?
Yeah.
Or are you trying to retain information for the long term? For your career?
Yeah.
And are you aiming for perfect accuracy? Or is a general understanding enough? Okay, so depending on what I'm trying to achieve with my memory, my brain will actually work differently.
That's the idea. Smirnov believed that these different orientations lead to different memory strategies and outcomes.
Wow. So I'm not just a passive recipient of information. I can actually, like, control how my brain processes and remembers things by being aware of my goals. This is blowing my mind.
That's the beauty of it. And the more you understand your own mnemonic orientation,
Okay.
the more effectively you can use your memory.
This reminds me of something else Smirnov researched, the difference between involuntary and intentional memorization.
Oh.
It's kind of counterintuitive, but he found that involuntary memorization, the stuff we remember without even trying,
Right.
can actually be better than intentional memorization if we're truly engaged in the activity.
That's right. His research challenged the assumption that we always remember best when we're consciously trying to memorize.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most effective learning happens when we're deeply engrossed in an activity,
Right.
even if we're not explicitly focused on remembering.
It's like how I can remember the lyrics to my favorite songs, even though I never sat down and tried to memorize them, or how I can recall vivid details from a book I loved, like even years later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this points to a fundamental principle in Smirnov's work. It's not just about effort.
Okay.
It's about the quality and nature of our engagement with information that really matters.
So it's not about forcing ourselves to remember. It's about finding ways to truly engage with the material. That's a relief, because brute force memorization has never really been my thing.
Right. And to illustrate this point, let's talk about a fascinating experiment Smirnov conducted. He had subjects walk a specific route and then later asked them to recall what they saw and thought about along the way. What do you think they remembered most vividly?
Let me think. I'm guessing they remembered the landmarks they saw, maybe some interesting shops or buildings.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what happened. They actually remembered the actions and obstacles they encountered along the way far more vividly than their thoughts or the things they simply observed. Things like, having to step over a puddle or squeeze past someone on the sidewalk.
Wait, seriously? So our brains prioritize remembering actions over thoughts. That's surprising.
It suggests that our brains are wired to prioritize information that's relevant to our immediate goals and actions.
Okay.
From an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense.
Right.
Remembering how to navigate your environment and avoid danger was crucial for survival.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's like our brains are constantly filtering information
Yeah.
and deciding what's worth holding on to, even when we're not consciously aware of it.
Exactly. And in another experiment, he showed people pictures and numbers.
Okay.
When the task was focused on numbers, people remembered the numbers better. And when the task was focused on pictures, they remembered the pictures better. It all comes back to what we're focusing on, what's important in that moment.
Okay, so it's not just about like passively observing things. It's about what we choose to pay attention to.
Yeah.
What we're like actively engaging with. This all ties back to that mnemonic orientation idea, right? Our goals actually shape what we remember.
Precisely. Our goals shape our perception and attention, which in turn influences what gets encoded into memory. It's like our brains are saying, okay, this is important right now, so let's make sure we hang on to this information.
I love how all these pieces are starting to like fit together. It's like we're building this whole new understanding of how memory works.
And there's another intriguing example Smirnov points out. He observed that actors often don't memorize lines directly, but rather by embodying the character.
Now that you mention it, I've always wondered how actors learn so much dialogue. It seems impossible to just like brute force memorize all those lines.
It highlights the power of what's called embodied cognition. The idea that our bodies are not just vessels for our minds,
Right.
but they're actually actively involved in the thinking process.
So by physically engaging with the material, by like doing, rather than just reading or listening, we can potentially learn and remember more effectively.
Exactly. Think about it. It's much easier to remember something you've done yourself compared to something you've only read about or heard about.
This is blowing my mind.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how much more control I have over my own memory than I ever realized.
That's the power of understanding these principles. And Smirnov's research goes even deeper. He also explored the relationship between the structure of a text and the different strategies we use to memorize it. He identified 3 main approaches: whole core, mosaic link, and meaningful grouping.
Those sound intriguing. Okay, tell me more about these memorization techniques. I'm ready to level up my memory game.
All right, let's break down these memorization strategies. Whole core, mosaic link, and meaningful grouping. Smirnov recognized that memorization isn't a one-size-fits-all process, The best approach depends on the type of information you're trying to remember.
That makes sense. So tell me, what is this whole core strategy all about?
Imagine you're trying to memorize a short poem or a list of simple instructions.
Okay.
With whole core memorization, you're basically trying to grasp the entire thing as a single unit. You repeat it over and over until you've got it down pat.
Okay, I get it. It's like memorizing a song or a multiplication table. You're not breaking it down into smaller chunks. You're just taking it all in at once. But what about mosaic link? That sounds a bit more complex.
Think about a longer text with lots of individual facts and details.
Okay.
Maybe a history timeline or a scientific classification system.
Yeah.
Mosaic link memorization is all about remembering those individual pieces and then linking them together in a sequence, almost like assembling a mosaic.
So instead of trying to grasp the whole thing at once, you're creating connections between smaller bits of information.
Exactly. And then we have meaningful grouping, which is all about finding the underlying structure and meaning in the material.
This one sounds right up my alley. I'm all about finding patterns and making connections. Tell me more.
With meaningful grouping, you're not just memorizing words on a page. You're actively trying to understand the relationships between ideas, identifying key themes, and creating a mental map of the information.
It's like organizing a messy closet, right?
Yeah.
You're grouping similar items together and creating categories to make sense of the chaos.
I love that analogy. And Smirnov found that our ability to use meaningful grouping effectively actually develops over time.
Okay.
It's influenced by our education, our experiences, and even, how our brains mature.
So it's a skill we can get better at with practice.
Absolutely. And this is where Smirnov's observations about school children come in. He noticed that younger students often struggle to create those meaningful groupings when asked to retell a text. They tended to rely more on those simpler whole core or mosaic link strategies.
It's like they haven't quite developed those mental muscles for higher level memorization yet.
Right.
Which makes sense. We're not born knowing how to organize complex information in our minds.
Right. And as we gain more experience and knowledge, we get better at identifying those underlying patterns and connections, which makes meaningful grouping a more accessible and effective strategy.
This reminds me of what we were talking about earlier with association.
Yeah.
Smirnov found that as we get older, we become better at connecting new information to what we already know. It's like building a mental web of knowledge, with each new piece of information strengthening the entire structure.
Exactly. And that ability to build associations is crucial for deep, lasting learning.
Right.
It's not just about memorizing isolated facts. It's about weaving those facts into the rich tapestry of what we already know.
So making connections is key.
Yeah.
But I imagine this can be challenging when we're learning something completely new,
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to build those associations when we're in unfamiliar territory?
That's where active engagement comes in again.
Okay.
Instead of passively absorbing information, try to actively question it, relate it to your own life, or even imagine how you might explain it to someone else.
Okay.
Even if those connections seem a bit silly or far-fetched at first, the very act of making them helps solidify the information in your mind.
So by forcing ourselves to think deeply about the material and connect it to something we already know, we're essentially creating those hooks in our memory.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the more hooks we have, the more likely we are to remember the information.
This is all starting to make so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go back to those mnemonic orientation strategies for a second.
Okay.
Can you give me some concrete examples of how I can actually, use this idea in my own life?
Absolutely. Let's say you're preparing for a big presentation at work.
Okay.
Are you aiming to remember every single detail so you can handle any question that comes your way?
Right.
Or is it more about hitting the key points and inspiring your audience with your overall message? That's your mnemonic orientation, guiding how you memorizing the material.
Oh, wow. I see what you mean. If I'm aiming for total recall, I might use a more detailed mosaic link approach, making sure I have all those individual facts and figures in place.
Right.
But if it's more about the big picture, maybe a meaningful grouping strategy would be more effective.
Exactly. By understanding your goal for remembering, you can tailor your approach and make your memorization efforts more effective.
No, that's what I call actionable advice.
Right.
This is way more useful than just being told to, like, try harder to remember things.
And another example, imagine you're trying to learn a new language.
Right.
Are you aiming to become fluent enough to have conversations? Or is it more about being able to read signs and menus while traveling? Your mnemonic orientation will influence everything from the vocabulary you focus on to the study methods you choose.
This is such a powerful concept. I never realized how much control I actually have over my own memory. It's not just this mysterious black box anymore.
And speaking of control, let's go back to Smirnov's emphasis on the importance of activity in shaping memory. He did some fascinating research on how our physical actions can actually influence what we remember.
Wait, really? So what we do with our bodies can affect what we remember. I'm all ears.
He conducted this really interesting experiment where he had people walk a specific route and then later asked them to recall what they saw and thought about along the way. What do you think they remembered most vividly?
I'm going to guess they remembered the things that stood out visually, maybe a colorful storefront or an unusual landmark.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what happened. They actually remembered the actions and obstacles they encountered along the way far more vividly than their thoughts or the things they simply observed. Things like having to step over a puddle or squeezing past someone on a crowded sidewalk.
That's so strange. So our brains prioritize remembering physical actions over thoughts or observations. Why would that be?
It suggests that our brains are wired to prioritize information that's relevant to our immediate goals and actions.
Okay.
Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. Remembering how to navigate your environment, avoid danger, and interact with the physical world was crucial for survival.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. Our ancestors weren't exactly sitting around pondering the meaning of life, right? They were out there doing things, and their brains needed to keep track of those actions to stay alive.
Exactly. And this principle still applies today.
Yeah.
Even if the stakes aren't quite as high, our brains are constantly filtering information and deciding what's worth holding on to, and actions often take priority.
Okay, so if I want to remember something, maybe I should try to incorporate some kind of physical action into the learning process.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm learning a new recipe, maybe I should actually cook the dish instead of just reading the instructions.
Exactly. Or if you're trying to memorize a presentation, maybe try practicing it while walking around the room instead of just sitting at your desk.
These are such practical tips. I'm already starting to think about how I could apply these ideas to my own life.
And here's another fascinating tidbit from Smirnov's research. He found that when people were shown a series of pictures and numbers, they were better at remembering the numbers when the task was focused on numbers.
Okay.
And better at remembering the pictures when the task was focused on pictures.
So again, it all comes back to what we're focusing on, what our goal is in that moment. It's like our brains are saying, okay, pay attention to this because this is what's important right now.
Exactly. Our goals shape our perception and attention, which then influence what gets encoded into memory.
I'm starting to realize that memory isn't just this passive process where information gets randomly stored in our brains. It's much more dynamic and interactive than that.
Smirnov's work really challenges our traditional view of memory, and he goes even deeper into this idea of active learning by highlighting the role of what's called cultural development in shaping our higher mental functions. This is where things get really interesting because it involves the work of another prominent Soviet psychologist, Lev Vygotsky.
Okay, Vygotsky, cultural development. I'm intrigued. Give me the rundown.
So Vygotsky, he believed that our higher mental functions,
Okay.
things like memory, attention, problem solving,
Right.
they're not just innate abilities,
Right.
they're actually shaped by our interactions with our culture and the tools that we use.
Okay, so it's not just like nature or nurture.
Yeah.
It's both working together.
Exactly. Vygotsky argued that we learn to master our own behavior through the use of symbols and tools that our culture provides.
Can you give me a concrete example?
Yeah.
my brain is still trying to like wrap itself around this idea.
Sure. Think about something as simple as a to-do list.
Okay.
It's a tool that helps you organize your thoughts, prioritize tasks, and remember what you need to accomplish.
Right.
In Vygotsky's sense, that to-do list is actually shaping your mental processes, helping you to master your own behavior.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like the to-do list is like an external representation of my internal thought processes.
Yeah.
And by interacting with that external tool, I'm actually like shaping how my brain works.
Exactly. And this applies to all sorts of cultural tools. Language, writing systems, maps, even, the way we organize information in a spreadsheet.
Right.
All of these things shape how we think, learn, and remember.
This is connecting back to what Smirnov was saying about the importance of activity.
Yes.
It's not just about physical actions. It's about engaging with the tools and symbols of our culture.
Precisely. And Smirnov takes this idea even further by exploring how our mnemonic orientation, remember, that's our goal for remembering,
Right.
can actually be influenced by cultural factors.
Okay, I'm really curious about this. So how does culture come into play with our mnemonic orientation? Could you give me an example?
Sure. Think about the difference between a culture that values oral storytelling versus a culture that emphasizes written documentation.
Right.
In a culture that relies heavily on oral tradition, people might develop incredibly strong memories for stories and spoken information.
Yeah.
While in a culture that relies heavily on written records, people might become more adept at remembering visual information and written details.
That's fascinating. So our cultural background can actually shape how we prioritize and remember different types of information.
Yeah.
It's not just about our individual goals, it's also about the values and practices of the society we live in.
Exactly. And this highlights the complex interplay between individual and cultural factors in shaping our memory.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. Activity, culture, mnemonic orientation.
Yeah.
It's like a whole new way of understanding how our memory works.
And Smirnov's work provides a valuable framework for thinking about these different influences.
So what's the key takeaway here? What can we do with this information to actually, improve our own memory? I mean, all this is fascinating, but I'm really interested in like the practical applications.
I think the biggest takeaway is this. By understanding how our memory works, we can become more active and intentional in shaping our own learning and remembering. Pay attention to your goals.
Right.
Choose activities that engage you.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate the power of making connections.
Right.
And be mindful of the cultural tools and practices that shape your thinking.
It's about becoming the architect of our own memory.
Yeah.
Not just passively letting things happen, but actively designing our own learning experiences.
Exactly. And as you delve deeper into Smirnov's work, you'll discover even more strategies and insights for maximizing your memory potential.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
Yeah.
I feel like my brain has expanded by about 1,000 gigabytes.
And remember, this is just the beginning. Smirnov's work opens up a whole new world of possibilities for understanding and improving memory.
So to wrap things up, what's the one thing you hope listeners will take away from this episode?
I hope they'll come away with a sense of empowerment.
Yeah.
Realizing that they have more control over their own memory than they might have thought.
Absolutely. And I encourage everyone listening to experiment with the techniques we discussed today. Play around with different mnemonic orientations. Try incorporating more activity into your learning. And don't be afraid to get creative with making those connections. Who knows, you might discover your own unique approach to unlocking the power of your memory.
And remember, learning should be an adventure, not a chore.
Right.
The more you enjoy the process, the more likely you are to remember what you learned.
That's a perfect note to end on. So go out there, explore, experiment, and have fun learning. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
So Vygotsky, he believed that our higher mental functions, things like memory, attention, problem solving, they're not just innate abilities, they're actually shaped by our interactions with our culture and the tools we use.
Okay, so it's not just nature or nurture, it's both working together.
Exactly. Vygotsky argued that we learn to master our own behavior through the use of symbols and tools that our culture provides.
Can you give me like a concrete example? My brain is still trying to like wrap itself around this idea.
Sure, sure. Think about something as simple as a to-do list.
Okay.
It's a tool that helps you organize your thoughts, prioritize tasks, and remember what you need to accomplish.
Right.
In Vygotsky's sense, that to-do list is actually shaping your mental processes, helping you to master your own behavior.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like the to-do list is like an external representation of my internal thought processes.
Yeah.
And by interacting with that external tool,
Yeah.
I'm actually like shaping how my brain works.
Exactly. And this applies to all sorts of cultural tools, language writing systems, maps, even, the way we organize information in a spreadsheet.
Right.
All of these things shape how we think, learn, and remember.
This is connecting back to what Smirnov was saying about the importance of activity.
Yes.
It's not just about physical actions. It's about engaging with the tools and symbols of our culture.
Precisely. And Smirnov takes this idea even further by exploring how our mnemonic orientation, remember, that's our goal for remembering, can actually be influenced by cultural factors.
Okay, I'm really curious about this. So how does culture come into play with our mnemonic orientation? Can you give me examples?
Sure. Think about the difference between a culture that values oral storytelling
Okay.
versus a culture that emphasizes written documentation.
Right.
In a culture that relies heavily on oral tradition, people might develop incredibly strong memories for stories and spoken information.
Yeah.
While in a culture that relies heavily on written records, people might become more adept at remembering visual information and written details.
That's fascinating. So our cultural background can actually shape how we prioritize and remember different types of information.
Yeah.
It's not just about our individual goals, it's also about the values and practices of the society we live in.
Exactly. And this highlights the complex interplay between individual and cultural factors in shaping our memory.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. Activity, culture,
Yeah.
mnemonic orientation.
Yeah.
It's like a whole new way of understanding how our memory works.
And Smirnov's work provides a valuable framework for thinking about these different influences.
So what's the key takeaway here? What can we do with this information to actually, improve our own memory? I mean, all this is fascinating, but I'm really interested in like the practical applications.
I think the biggest takeaway is this. By understanding how our memory works,
Okay.
we can become more active and intentional in shaping our own learning and remembering. Pay attention to your goals.
Right.
Choose activities that engage you.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate the power of making connections.
Right.
And be mindful of the cultural tools and practices that shape your thinking.
It's about becoming the like architect of our own memory.
Yeah.
Not just passively letting things happen, but actively designing our own learning experiences.
Exactly. And as you delve deeper into Smirnov's work, you'll discover even more strategies and insights for maximizing your memory potential.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
I feel like my brain is expanded by about 1,000 gigabytes.
And remember, this is just the beginning. Smirnov's work opens up a whole new world of possibilities for understanding and improving memory.
So to wrap things up, what's the one thing you hope listeners will take away from this episode?
I hope they'll come away with a sense of empowerment, realizing that they have more control over their own memory than they might have thought.
Absolutely. And I encourage everyone listening to experiment with the techniques we discussed today. Play around with different mnemonic orientations. Try incorporating more activity into your learning. And don't be afraid to get creative with making those connections. Who knows, you might discover your own unique approach to unlocking the power of your memory.
And remember, learning should be an adventure, not a chore.
Right.
The more you enjoy the process, the more likely you are to remember what you learn.
That's a perfect note to end on. So go out there, explore, experiment, and have fun learning. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.